Welcome to the show. Now, this week, the Ugandan media has kept a very keen eye on the death of Emmanuel Tegu, a student at Makerere University. Conflicting reports say that he died of a mob action, but other reports indicate that he could have been brutally beaten by local defense unit officers or police officers. One thing that could have solved that is CCTV, private CCTV footage in the hands of the St. Augustine Chapel in Makerere. But now, a fight for that CCTV footage has pitted journalists up against police. We talked to Solomon Kawesa about this story.
The tip came in from a friend of Tegu that I know very well. It was like just in a conversation that we had over WhatsApp. And she was like, someone in Makerere, a friend of mine, was assaulted. People assumed he was a thief and is now in hospital suffering. Then later in the morning of Sunday, she tells me that the guy is dead. So this is how I picked interest in the story. So I raised the story to my editors, and then on Monday we started following up the story.
On Sunday, the 5th of July, Ugandan social media went irate with the news of Emmanuel Tegu's death. He was a final year student of veterinary medicine who, by various accounts now on the record, died from injuries that were caused by an alleged mob. His death fed straight into the public anger against law enforcement agencies that had been building up since the start of the curfew. The death also moved the story of Tegu from the back pages of Uganda's media to a permanent front page. Streams of tweets calling for justice for Tegu also captured the public mood. Some came from as high as the Speaker of the Ugandan Parliament. The building public pressure forced the Uganda police into providing an account for the last hours of the death of Tegu, and it is here that they turn to the media to control the narrative. What, however, should have been an elaborate statement generated far more questions and exposed the nascent inconsistencies at the heart of police's investigation.
Since inception, there are allegations, and we have contradicting stories and statements from different people. We have people who say, who first came out and said that it were the LDUs who assaulted this young man. And then later on, police comes up with a statement that it is a mob. So we have been having questions that where could the mob have come from at that time, 10 p.m. in the night. You know, it is weird. We only expect maybe people doing patrols at that time to be walking around the university. So that has been a question of contention. Where did this mob come from that the police claims? Yet we have another statement saying that there was a dying declaration where the guy was narrating to the mother that he was beaten up by security agents. I don't know how to give you a clear picture of, because when we went out to cover this story, we thought it would be any normal story, like the stories we do. You go do a story, but then as we were investigating, we realized that, you know, there is some footage which was captured by St. Augustine Chapel in Makerere, where the scuffle is said to have ensued. So we thought that it would be that easy for us to access the footage and you know, we tell the public the truth. But it seems like this is where now we have another problem, whereby at first security said that we are not supposed to access this information. And we were like, why shouldn't we? And where in the law is it suggested that journalists can't access this information? We are citizens like other Ugandans, because when they came to extract their part, we were even locked out. We stayed outside until we forced ourselves inside there to really understand what was going on. Are these people trying to alterate the footage, the original footage, so that by the time we come, we find something vague and it can hide all the evidence? So when we reached there, we were also not allowed to reach the room where these cameras are controlled from. So we stayed outside and we couldn't get the clear story. So this leaves us with a question: Is police trying to hide something? Or because by law Article 41 of the Constitution, we have the right to access of information. And in the law, there are just a few circumstances where we can be barred from getting such footage. As a journalist who has been in this business for long, I believe that this footage is the best answer we have to all the questions that the public has been asking. If you tell us that there were even gunshots around that place and there is someone chasing the deceased, we want to know, who is this person? And if you tell me that it's the mob that was chasing him, these civilians don't have guns. It's the police, the army that we expect to carry guns along at night. And when you interview some of the victims, the people in custody, the relatives are saying that yes, some of these people moved out upon hearing the gunshots. So that is where we want to see, how did this begin? Because these cameras at St. Augustine tell us who was chasing the late Tegu to the point of his alleged assault.
Growing demand for access to privately recorded CCTV footage of the last hours of Tegu became, in that week, a key cog in unlocking an investigation that seemed to be winding in its turns.
The room is small. Yeah, the room is small. Everybody can put it in a big place. You're going to view this thing.
No, the problem I find is that police have been alleged in killing something.
Yes,
so denying us being there. We understand you could be officials coming from outside, but denying us from accessing that scene creates suspicion.
It's okay.
You come.
So even if you come right now,
It's okay.
play.
I'm not.
Now you go back. You go back. We are not allowed.
You cannot play.
We are not allowed.
Okay, just
I find
It's okay.
you be there.
There is just a little problem.
we are not playing.
They are all
We are extracting. After extracting, then we can view. We can even view all of us.
Journalists camped at the St. Augustine Church, waiting days on end for access to the footage. This image of journalists locked out of the room where the footage was being previewed by police was monumental.
As a journalist who has been in this business for long, I believe that this footage is the best answer we have to all the questions that the public has been asking. If you tell us that there were even gunshots around that place and there is someone chasing the deceased, we want to know, who is this person? And if you tell me that it's the mob that was chasing him, these civilians don't have guns. It's the police, the army that we expect to carry guns along at night. And when you interview some of the victims, the people in custody, the relatives are saying that yes, some of these people moved out upon hearing the gunshots. So that is where we want to see, how did this begin? Because these cameras at St. Augustine tell us who was chasing the late Tegu to the point of his alleged assault. One, the story is still putting the trust of our police in question. Besides the trust, there is also the training. And training does not mean target, that you get a gun, you can shoot target, and therefore you can put on our uniform and come to serve. I always ask myself that after training of running and target, whatever, do these people sit in class and they are taught about the law? Because if you're here to enforce the law, I expect an officer to know the protocol. Because recently when I was interviewing the police spokesperson, Mr. Inanga, he was also saying that UCC has to come out clearly on this. But I believe we have at least a law or a policy on data protection. It is there, and I thought these people knew about it, and they knew the protocol through which this information has to get to the public, because this is a privately owned CCTV camera, whereby if it is mine, I'm free to use it the way I want. Now, where the story ends is that if we don't see these pictures, or if the pictures come out and they are from the hands of the police, or they have come from the church but after police has extracted its copy, the footage is going to be questionable by the public. They will be asking, why now? Why not then when we needed to watch it? So, however much people are charged in court, some might say that there was no justice, because these are the pictures that were going to give these people either their justice or to incriminate them. Story I've done for 5 days, and that means that every time you go out in the field, what you get there, people expect what you get as answers to the questions that they are asking. But whenever they remain with a question, one or two, it means that tomorrow you have to go back and answer that question. So I have been out there, and I want to answer the question of who chased Tegu first in the footage.
We'll now take a very short break, but when we return, we talk to Yusuf Serunkuma about the media's coverage of the Islamic faith. Welcome back to the show. Now, over the years, religion, ethnicity, and sexuality are some of the hard topics the media has had to deal with, particularly in the creation of perception. The global fight on terrorism created the impression that the Islamic faith was the driving force behind terrorism, and Uganda's media has been no scapegoat of that. Many of Uganda's media articles, particularly targeting the Islamic faith, have created the impression that they are the driving force behind terrorism. Now, this week, an article in the Daily Monitor caused a storm when many of the Muslim faithfuls accused the Daily Monitor of creating that perception in their coverage of the new mosques that were driving up in the cities all across the country. We talked to Yusuf Serunkuma, who is a scholar but also a Muslim and also a media journalist and enthusiast, to tell us about his perception on how the media has been covering Islamic faith in Uganda.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allah.
Why are you counting them? When you identify there's a community of 5,000, what is the logic behind saying there are 5,000 Muslims in Lira town? The article, in fairness, would have gone further to question what is this registration, right? There should have been a bit of knowledge that the Muslims don't register to belong to a community. I mean, somebody should have known that. So why is this registration going on? So, but it doesn't happen like that. What actually happens is that, you're interested in a demographic. And the idea behind demography, if you read colonial history, is to control them. How many are they? How are we going to control them? That's the idea behind demographics.
The eye of the storm, a deeply divisive debate, both at a global, regional, and national level. On Friday, the 3rd of July, the Daily Monitor published an article that sought to explain the new mushrooming mosques in Uganda's towns. The article, which spoke at length to Muslim leaders, scholars and analysts, however, received a very cold welcome. Many social media users questioned the motive behind the journalism, whilst others asked why, of all religions, the newspaper chose Islam. The age-old debate of Islam and Islamism was reignited mostly by the context and timing of the article. In its context, the Daily Monitor linked the article to insecurity in the country. A prominent scholar and media enthusiast, Yusuf Serunkuma, has been questioning the monitor about that article.
So the question, starting from the question, who is building these new high-rise mosques, right? That's the question. That question alone is filled with a lot of Islamophobia, if you think about it. I don't know how the editors agreed to pass such a question because there's a lot of Islamophobia in it. And like I said, you're asking who is building these many high-rise mosques, right? So the idea is that they can build so many grand mosques as they want, but building these old high-rise, they can't afford it. You can ask a rich man, you can't ask a rich man why he's building so many real estate projects, right? You can't ask a rich man, but you can ask a poor man who is funding him to do all those things. And the stereotype in there is the stereotype of poverty, right? So we know Muslims as being poor. They can't afford to do these things on their own, okay? And the poverty in so many other aspects of life, schools, welfare, etc., they are inherently poor. That's a stereotype about Muslims in this country. So for you to ask such a question is you're speaking to the stereotype, all right? So I was querying the stereotype. Is a monitor editors aware that it's stereotypical to accuse a minority community of being poor, a stereotype which has been there for a long period, right? So that was my first contention with the article. Then getting into it.
Before we can move on from that one, is it wrong to question the stereotype? Because the article goes ahead to mention district caddies, it talks to religious leaders. So what's the wrong, besides it being just a stereotype, what's the wrong in pointing out the stereotype and sort of fleshing out an article around it, which would have helped someone appreciate the fact of the matter?
So Islamophobia works within a context, all right? It works within a history. So this is why if somebody called you nigger in this country, you don't feel racialized. Although if you said that to an American, the context warrants anger when you call the nigger in America or in Europe. But if you call that here, it's really cool, right? Well, not really cool, but I think a Ugandan would really feel offended if it's called a nigger, the way an American would, because the context is lacking. I mean, there's a historical claim of abuse of Muslims being unable to do things. There's a historical claim of Muslims being poor. You know, there's a context of poverty. If you listen to so many stereotypes about Muslims, they are only spending their time cutting meat in butcheries as opposed to doing other things, right? So, and then in specific to building mosques, because we have a recent history of mosques being associated with terrorism and radicalism in this country. So hitherto innocent projects like being a masjid, when you attach resources to where resources coming from elsewhere, you are accusing the mosque of being involved in some sort of a security threat, some say terrorist project behind it, you know, as being a project where radicalism is spread, you know, that kind of thing. You remember there was a time when local places where children were learning Quran were being shut down, and the claim was, you know, they're involved in radicalizing kids. Okay, so if you put a question in this context, who is funding these high-rise mosques, which we know Muslims can't afford, right? Which we know they're being involved in radicalism. Who is funding them? The funder must have some sinister motive. That's the entire coterie of streets that you're speaking into. And that is through and through Islamophobic. Right? That is very Islamophobic. But you know, to understand that, you have to go into the entire thing. So many things that informed the article. Among other things, there was profiling of Muslims, right? So you say profiling and counting. There are 5,000 Muslims in Lira, all right? And they're being registered. So first of all, we know that Muslims don't register to become Muslims in a community. We just belong. You can't say, we're registering as Muslims in the community would mean something else. They're not registering to belong to the Ummah. No, you don't register to belong to the Ummah, you belong because you're Muslim. So when you're counting them, why are you counting them? There's a colonial history to counting and numbering people because you wanted to control them. So why are you counting these Muslims saying they're 5,000? How are you sure this is the number of Muslims in Lira town, right? But before we even question why you're counting them, you know, when you identify there's a community of 5,000, what is the logic behind saying there are 5,000 Muslims in literal town? The article, in fairness, would have gone further to question what is this registration, right? There should have been a bit of knowledge that the Muslims don't register to belong to a community. I mean, somebody should have known that. So why is this registration going on? So, but it doesn't happen like that. What actually happens is that, you know, you're interested in a demographic. And the idea behind demography, if you read colonial history, is to control them. How many are they? How are we going to control them? That's the idea behind demographics. So why are you counting them? And then in this country, as Muslims, you have this history that we often undercounted, right? You count the number and it's less because, you know, you don't want to claim that in this secular country, there are so many Muslims, right? You know, so Muslims have this grudge with the state. The state has often undercounted Muslims because, you know, you don't want to portray them as being overwhelmed by the Muslim majority around them. So, you know, so it spoke to that too. So there was this component of counting. There was another component. There was another component which I think pointed out earlier, the idea of high class. High class meaning they can't afford it. They can afford these ordinary ones, but they can't afford it, right? So the idea of high class also came out. But then what was like most appalling was connecting the entire story to security, right? The conclusion of the story is relating mosques to security. Now, that's the peak of Islamophobia, right? That's the peak of Islamophobia, especially after 9/11, that everything Muslims do has to do with security. And when you allow them to do all these so many things, they're getting connection with the Middle East, which is the epicenter of radicalism in Islamic extremism. So to allow them to say, okay, they are now okay to operate, they are not a security threat, all right? The concluding point for me was really dangerous. When you connect these mosques to security, you're actually speaking to a classic, traditional, very obvious Islamophobic prop of saying whatever Muslims do is Islamophobic, right? You know, if after 9/11, I mean, you know, for example, if you have a name that identifies as Muslim, that was reason enough to have you like go through more security checks in airports, right? You know, every single instant in this country, people would be murdered and the following day, Kale Kahura's brigade would pick up Muslims as the potential, they were like not potential, they were, what is the word? They were the cardinal suspects of any murder. Even if the murderers were Muslim, the murderers were Muslims, victims were Muslims, we have people who are still rotting in jail for the murder of Kawesi. Even now we know that really Muslims had nothing to do about the murder of Fani Kawesi, right? Whoever got murdered in this country for a very long period, as long as Kale Kahura was IGP, Muslim was the first suspect. Mm-hmm. Not just, at some point, Muslims even thought that Kahura would have Muslim suspect already in jail before the murder actually happened. You see? So right now, if you write a story and then the victim, rather a story about mosques, and you connect it to security, you are speaking to a very traditional Islamophobic prop we have in this country.
Is it a problem of the media, or it's a construct of the state that the media is reporting on? Should the media look beyond the state? Because I can tell you that when the editorial meetings are happening, for example, and people are discussing terror suspects, 9 in every 10 of the terror suspects they've been paraded with in the media they've been Muslim. And this Islamophobia then starts, it becomes the subconscious of the newsroom. Should the newsroom sidestep the state and start to either question the narrative that the state has built around Islam?
You know, I wrote a response to Chachi's article yesterday, and I argued that this is cultured Islamophobia, like it's become part of our subconscious, right? We are Islamophobic because we are constructed that way. I think some of the Islamophobia is really inadvertent. It is subtle, right? Subtle in the sense, maybe subtle is not a good one. It's become culture. And my contention is this: before I blame the media for being Islamophobic, I think they need to be retrained. The media has to be above the state, all right? The American government is very Islamophobic. I mean, in the era of Trump, they've become extremely Islamophobic. But media in America has done a wonderful job stepping outside the Islamophobia, right? You see this is Islamophobic, you step outside of it, right? So what bothers us most is when seemingly the fourth estate, those that we expect to know better, right, are towing the line set by the state. All right, there's no doubt about these matters in this country. The idea of insecurity in this country is often blamed onto Muslims. It's very Islamophobic, right? You parade on the Muslims, Muslims are the victims, Muslims are the killers. The matter of women, you parade Muslims. The matter of Afghanistan, you parade Muslims. Joan Kagazi, you parade Muslims, right? It's outright Islamophobia, right? But also it's like the construct of the global politics right now that it's easy to accuse Muslims of being Islamophobic, or rather of being involved in insecurity insecurity and extremism. But we will often challenge the state rather than media to do better. In my response to Charles, I said to him, this is not about calming down Muslims as telling them, no, it was unintended. No, that's not what we're looking for. What we're demanding of media here is you need to know better, right? There's some jobs where you have to just be good. I mean, you know, there's a joke by Chris Rock that if you are a pilot, you can say, I am not good enough. Because you're a pilot, you're going to be flying an airplane. You can say, oh, you know, sometimes a company like Emirates can say, we have good and have bad pilots, right? You can say that. In some jobs, you just have to be good. There's no excuse. If you're going to deal with things such as a journalist, you have to be good in terms of gathering evidence, in knowing the subtle cues and the structured forms of violence and Islamophobia that are within the genocide key. I just think that moderators should be better.
Yusuf, the other thing I want to talk about is not just a national debate, it's also a global debate. A lot of what we'd call recruitment by terrorist agencies, organizations, is being done through Islamism. Not Islam, but Islamism. The use of quotes, writings of Islam as a sort of recruitment tool. In a 21st century, like the one we're in, and with a media like the one in Uganda, with all the shortfalls, you know, because you've been part of the media, how can the Ugandan media take part in this debate of Islamism and Islam? And considering the fact that we're really one of the backyards where such a debate is happening because of our taking part in Somalia, because of the terrorist bombings in Kampala.
First of all, we are past the scholarship which argues that recruitment is done in the name of Islam, right? We know so well now that terrorism is not limited to Muslims. We know that it's been unfair over the years to accuse Muslims of being terrorists and not accuse all the other groups of being terrorist activity, right? We know it as a common slur to quickly accuse Muslims of being involved in terrorist and recruitments happening in the name of religion. We know there are so many religious groups across the world involved in acts of terror. In fact, they are not just being called terrorism, right? So every belief has a fanatic wing. Most of the Muslims you see in our communities have nothing to do with terrorism. They have zero idea. They just want to be good people. Walk the streets of Kampala, visit Cafe Java, sit down and have a beautiful cup of coffee, walk into the library and read a good book. That's the ordinary Muslim, right? The ordinary Muslim wants to be better as a human being, right? And we have interacted with a scholarship which connects terror to politics, right? The scholarship is like really in our midst, which connects terrorism to politics. There's nothing to do with religion and politics, and religion and terrorism. That scholarship is a lot, all right? It's a lot. There are lots of books. I mean, Mahmoud Mamdani, the guy at Macquarie University, has a good book of Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. It's a 2004 book. You can read it. It's a good starting point. I think the book is really very escapist. It escapes the entire deeper political economic challenge that are facing the Middle East. But it's a good starting point. It actually makes the point that connects politics to terrorism and nothing to do with religion, right? It's just that the game is being played out in the Middle East and in the Arab world. And so this is the claim. So we are with this scholarship. And my challenge to everybody in the media is that you better be on top of this game. You have to interact with the scholarship. There's a book here. By Richard, Professor Feldman and Pape. They argue that, you know, terrorist activities sprung up, they shot up wherever there was an occupation by American forces in the Arab world and in Africa, right? So we have moved on from the scholarship which connects terrorism to religion. If you haven't, then you are really slow we are not connecting church to religion anymore, right? The debate in Europe and the American media is moved into the direction we connect politics to terrorism. Terrorism is a political act. When you look at so many terror activities that happen in America, for example, they're all being connected to politics, right? You have a group, I think, I don't know, what is it? The Tamil Tigers, right? You have the Lord's Resistance Army. All these were terrorist groups, but they were not debating the language of terror, right? So we are past the scholarship. And my plea to Ugandan media is that they have to catch up. I know the challenges are so many, and I really appreciate guys like you who try to be in touch with the scholarship. You read. The problem with this media, as Mwenda has often pointed out, is that Ugandan journalists are not reading. And I'm still very sympathetic. I don't want to think that they're not reading because they're not reading, because no bread and butter issues really come at the forefront. But the challenge is, if you want to report on a topic, you better be good. You better be good. It's in this era right now, after COVID-19, we're not connecting terrorism to religion. We are connecting terrorism to politics. It's as simple as that.
Yusuf, my final question to you. There are many newsrooms which are going to be reporting stories on, say, Islam as a religion, just basic religious reporting. And I know that many newsrooms really just report on Islam normally around festivals of Islam or when Muslim faithful have wrangles. What kind of reporting do you want to see on Islam in Ugandan media?
I don't know if I want a particular form of reporting on Islam, right? I don't think there's a particular demand I'm going to put on the Ugandan media on how they should report Islam. Let's just do normal reporting. As a journalist, just be good at doing a job, right? If the issue is not religious, there's no reason to religious fight. Just do the normal reporting. Muslims are not demanding for a special place when being reported. I don't think a Muslim would be as really sanctimonious to demand a thing like that. I don't think so. I think what we're demanding for is that be fair. Be fair in your reporting. Be what in scholarship we call philology. Seek to understand, right? If you want to report a thing like that, seek to understand it. It's the challenge we have. I mean, as you report any other story, seek to understand the story on its terms, right? If you say, for example, that the Muslims are rural, are being registered and there are 5,000 in the community. I mean, the first thing you know about Islam, you learn a bit about Islam that Muslims don't register to belong to Islam. You're just Muslim, as simple as that. I really don't think Muslims are demanding for anything special. All we're demanding is fairness in reporting. If you are reporting about mosques, report about them fairly. There's nothing to do with mosques and insecurity. Don't make that connection. It's a very frivolous connection. Don't quickly make that connection. If you're reporting about a Muslim scholar, report about him as a scholar, and let him be independently constituted, right? It's unfair if Yusuf, for example, commits an act, right? And you say Muslims, those broad brushes, right? Individuals commit atrocities and then you paint the entire religion. That's unfair, right? You're not being fair. Be fair. If Yusuf Serum committed a crime, right? I know I embody a constituency behind me, but deal with me the way you report about anything else. I mean, we didn't report Lord's Resistance Army as a Christian. You didn't ask Archbishop Lwanga to explain coin, right? I never had an instant where Archbishop Lwanga has to explain why is coin committing all this crime. We never had that. Don't demand from Muslims to explain. Say, like this, what's the name? Jamil Mukulu. Don't demand of Muslims to explain Jamil Mukulu's actions. Don't. But you see, there's this connection. You know, when the bombing in Chadondo happened, I remember a very touching story of a Muslim who was wearing a cap. He was on a taxi, and he was moving from Kampala to Zira. He told me this story personally. He said he had to disembark off this taxi because they were abusing him for remaining a Muslim when his Muslim brothers committed the crimes in Chadondo. Muslims actually died in Chadondo, right? They were victims of the Chadondo bombings. So, I mean, without holding those who committed the Chadondo bombings to account, Uganda was holding account an entire religion. All of us became perpetrators. All of us became sympathizers. What was this connection? there was zero connection whatsoever. There were Muslims crying because they lost family in Chadondo, right? So another thing we would have demanded from the Uganda media is don't broad brush, don't use these sweeping allegations accusing entire communities, entire constituencies of being complicit. Don't turn seemingly innocent acts of prayer and worship on faith and charity. There was a misreading. The sheikh in the story said, Muslims don't go about bragging about their donations. That's not secrecy. That's called the Islamic tradition. When the Prophet told us, when you give with your right hand, your left hand should know, right? So we don't brag about our donations, which is part of the tradition. It's not secrecy. We're not hiding anything, right? It's the tradition. But the story sort of insinuated that, they are hiding their donations. No. That's called the tradition, right? We have friends from everywhere. Then you put international donors in quotes. What are you alleging? What are you insinuating by putting international? You're not being fair. Our demand for fairness and a little understanding. If you're going to talk about Muslims, learn about the Muslims a little bit, right? Yes. The basic thing you can know is speak to your neighbor, the Muslim in your neighborhood that you see. He could introduce you to a key little things about Muslims, for example. They are polygamous, right?
Yes.
They're polygamous. It's part of their tradition. It's not like they are exotic. They are barbaric. It's part of their tradition, right? So you learn this on their terms. This is okay. On your terms, it's not okay. All right. Although I also learn about minority communities. I hope I'm not stretching my responses.
No.
But if you live in a secular society, Uganda is considered a secular society, right? And if you read about the history of secularism, like the making of the secular is actually a Christianized version. So you need to be aware that when as a country, when we claim to be secular, we're actually speaking to a Christian modernity, right? The idea of so we need to be aware that as Uganda, we're constructed. This so-called secular republic of Uganda is actually a Christianized modernity. It's a Christianized modernity. So you better be aware that when I speak from this vantage point, and I'm pointing the finger, we have been associated into some sort of a Christianized modernity. And we ought to be aware that there are other modernities that are not really like us, all right? Which are sort of, they look away from the state. All right, so these nuances, I'm challenging, I think really it's a tall order, but I'm challenging journalists to be aware and be in sync with these little nuances because they matter so much. They hurt us when you come out as ignorant. They hurt us, right?
Yes.
Muslims are hurt in this space, they're really hurt.
Thank you so much for watching The Fourth Estate. We continue to hold the media accountable for the stories that they cover, also continue to critique the angles that the media takes in the coverage of their stories. This week, we'll leave you with something that we found on social media now. 2 legislators in their free time under a mango tree. What were they doing? Something that you shouldn't miss. Thank you so much for joining us for Fourth Estate. My name is Raymond Mujini. Have yourself a good weekend.
There has to be lifting lockdown in Gulu. No way. If they fail, we have plan B.
Monday is not far.
Open Gulu.